My name is Michael Martin. I'm the director of the Center for Louisiana Studies. I want to thank you for coming out this morning to our symposium on gun violence in Louisiana. If you haven't been to the Alumni Center here at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, I encourage you during some free moments to walk around, check the place out. It's a really beautiful building. I want to start by saying if you have one of these, make sure it is turned either to off or silent. We don't want to disturb our speakers, our presenters. With that out of the way, I'd like to begin with some words of thanks, and then I have a few comments by way of introduction to the symposium, and then we'll have a brief moment of changing out the panelists, and we'll begin at 9:30. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone who's taken the time out of their busy schedules to come here this morning. This program shows me that there are people out in Louisiana who are dedicated to studying and learning more about the problem of gun violence, and there are people like you who are dedicated to coming out and learning more about it for yourselves. What I hope we'll be able to do today is have a frank and very straightforward discussion of gun violence in the state of Louisiana, and I'm glad to see that everyone is here to participate in that. Second, I want to thank my staff at the Center for Louisiana Studies and my graduate students. Not all of them are in here, some of them are. They've worked in numerous ways to make this program a success, and they are wandering around still at this very moment doing the very same thing. Those are Assistant Director for Special Projects and Programming, Jennifer Guidry, Assistant Director for Research, John Sharp, Archivist Chris Segura, who is sitting over here doing the sound on the floor, Administrative Assistant Linda Garber, and Graduate Assistants Megan Smith and Molly DeMoore. Third, I want to thank AOC Community Media, who are here filming. If you notice the cameras coming in, yes, round of applause for them. They're going to take what we do here, which only has a limited audience, so we can only fit so many people in this room, put it up on their channels once it's edited down, and make it available to the entire community and for viewing on the web. Fourth, I want to thank someone who's not here but who should be thanked, and that's New Orleans photographer Cheryl Gerber. She took this image, which we've used on our posters, our Facebook page, and for other reasons. It's from her forthcoming book, New Orleans: Life and Death in the Big Easy. So I'm very grateful to Cheryl for allowing us to use that image. The image was taken in the aftermath of a shooting homicide in Gretna, Louisiana. I'm also grateful to the UL Lafayette Alumni Association. As I said earlier, this is a very beautiful facility. We have lots of space here to do what we need to do, and they're always accommodating and helpful to us. So a big thanks to them. Finally, I'd like to thank the College of Liberal Arts, and Dean Jordan Kelman, who have provided us with not only moral support, but also a little bit of financial support to make this program a reality. Dean Kelman is here today, and I'd like to ask him to make a few comments.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to see a healthy crowd and some of our leading lights from the university and from the community here for this very important event. I too would like to begin by thanking Michael Martin and the Center for Louisiana Studies staff for putting this event on. It was a timely and meaningful and necessary idea, and we're all grateful that the center is there for this kind of thing. I think that recent events in Lafayette in particular and Louisiana in general, our recent experiences with gun violence and the tragedies that surround it have left a certain impression on all of us, a very strong impression on all of us. I think that many of us have been, of course, shocked and devastated by the consequences that gun violence can wreak in our community. Many of us have also been, I think, justifiably proud and moved by the community response that we've seen. And it's a testimony to the community that we have in South Louisiana that I think many people feel that on a emotional level, on a spiritual level, we really came together as a community when these kinds of tragedies have visited us. But I'm not sure that we could say the same thing about our response analytically to these events and in terms of understanding their social origins and social meanings and the historical roots of the gun violence that we have today in the world, in the United States, and at some point we may have to say particularly in Louisiana. We certainly have had our share of that history. We have, by almost any measure, the highest incarceration rate in the world in our state, and much of that incarceration is due to gun violence and its consequences. And in many ways, our society, wonderful though it is in so many facets, has not been a very hospitable place to open and frank, as Dr. Martin put it, and searching social queries and historical queries into the nature and meaning and origins of gun violence. And that is one of the roles that the university, and I like to think the College of Liberal Arts, and certainly the Center for Louisiana Studies can help to fulfill. The center has been involved in socially conscious and socially engaged scholarship and academic programming since its inception. In fact, it was founded out of a felt need to promote a kind of scholarship that resonated with who we are in South Louisiana, and has been doing that kind of socially engaged research and outreach and academic programming ever since. Doing it, I might say, before it was cool to do socially engaged academic research in that sense. And so this fits very well within that mission. And again, I'd like to thank Michael Martin and the Center for Louisiana Studies staff for making this very important moment available to us. Michael?
Thank you, Jordan. So I'd like to spend just a few moments talking about the creation and the inception of this particular symposium, but also an ongoing series that we'll be creating over the next few years that will deal with topics like this. Then I want to make a statement about gun violence that I hope will kind of drive some of the discussion that we have today. Today's symposium emanated from a series of discussions that were held internally at the Center for Louisiana Studies earlier this summer. The first of those discussions, which was very informal, it was just kind of me and another staff member sitting around talking about ideas, talking about problems and things in Louisiana that we need to address. That focused on the general idea of creating a program that would address all those ways in which Louisiana leads the nation in negative categories. We're number one, or we're near number one, in so many negative indicators: incarceration rates, obesity, poverty, income disparity, among others. Yet those things seem to only get passing glances from the media, from politicians, and yes, from the research of state scholars. Yet there are people out there who are developing creative solutions, or at least attempting to develop those solutions to these problems. And our idea was to have some sort of ongoing symposium series that would address these problems, probably on an annual basis. So that idea was hatched that we would start up just such a series, but of course it was the events of late July, the shootings at the Grand Theater on Simcoe Street and on Sunnyside Lane here in Lafayette, that left our community in shock and grief. Those events are what prompted us to tackle the topic of gun violence as the very first of these symposia. And it seems logical, beyond the recent spate of shootings, that we should look at this topic first anyway. After all, the ways in which Louisiana performs poorly, for the most part, in relation to other states, those things that I listed a moment ago, among others, those are really, to some degree, indicators of quality of life. But gun violence is a direct affront to life itself. And if we, like most other modern societies, consider taking a life among the most severe and distressing actions that an individual or society can enact upon another person, then we have to confront the fact that Louisiana, more often than practically anywhere else in the nation and at a high level around the world, in Louisiana, people are being killed with guns at an unacceptable and indefensible rate. Those indicators are clear. Louisiana consistently rates at or near the top of the list of per capita gun deaths. It was number 1 in 2010 and 2011, number 2 in 2012 and 2013. Those are the most recent years for which we have numbers. In 2010, 864 Louisianians died as a result of gun violence. That number declined slightly in 2011 and 2012, but then rose to 886 in 2013. As a ratio of firearm deaths to overall population level, the numbers hover somewhere around 18 to 100,000, a ratio that is surpassed only by Wyoming in 2012 and Alaska in 2013. In both of those years, we were number 2. The most blunt way of looking at this is that, on average, a Louisianan is killed by a gun every 10 hours. Looking more specifically at the murders that are committed in the state and the subset of those committed using guns, it's clear that the overwhelming number of murders were committed by perpetrators who used guns. Typically, about 80% of all murders in the state resulted from gun violence. It's also clear that among those gun murders, handgun usage eclipsed all other weapons usage. In 2010, handguns were used in 263 of the state's murders. It's a full 75% of the murders committed with firearms and 60% of the total. By 2013, the use of handguns resulted in 298 murders, which was 66% of the total murders and 84% of the murders by gun. Some more stark numbers. In 2013, some 93 children were murdered in Louisiana. That's a horrifying number in and of itself. Of those, 66, or a full 71%, died as a result of a gunshot. Between 2008 and 2012, an average of 17 Louisiana women per year were killed by domestic abusers using guns. As a factor of the overall population, that number comes to 7.18 domestic violence gun homicides per million, which is the second highest rate in the nation. Now, some people might make a case that New Orleans, which is considered a particularly dangerous city and, of course, provides a very substantial portion of Louisiana's population, New Orleans might be the reason why our numbers are so high. But even if we remove the city's gun violence numbers from the states, we see that Louisiana is still heavily burdened by deaths caused by firearms. The numbers of criminal shootings for New Orleans is significantly higher than most other cities. It's a city of roughly 350,000 people, and in an average year it has around 470 shootings, typically with 150 or so fatalities. That's an average. Yet comparing those numbers to the state's overall murders by firearm leave the numbers of dead outside of New Orleans very high as well, still very high on the overall state numbers. 226 outside of New Orleans murders by gun in 2013. What that means is roughly 4 Louisianans outside of the city are murdered by a gun or a gun-wielding perpetrator every week. What about the sheer monetary cost of this? And this is something that sometimes gets lost. In 2010, according to the estimates of the Centers for Disease Control, and these are pretty conservative estimates, the overall cost of deaths for firearms or by firearms in the United States came to $40 billion. That's the United States, or an average of $1.26 million per death. Taking that average and applying it to Louisiana for the same year brings the total cost of gun deaths in our state to $443 million. Now, those are conservative numbers. Other estimates place the numbers much higher, some as high as $228 billion per year for the nation. If we extrapolate that down to Louisiana, it comes out to around $2.5 billion. Much of that money is incurred at the cost of, or the cost is paid by taxpayers. A lot of the people who are shot require care that is not provided through medical insurance. A lot of the investigatory costs are covered by taxpayers. A lot of even the burial costs and so forth are covered by taxpayers as well. So this is something that, as taxpayers in Louisiana, we have to be concerned with, this enormous cost to our state in terms of sheer dollars and cents. I'll conclude with a couple of notes about today's program. I tried to develop a program that would look at gun violence in our state in a number of different ways, and I'm pleased that it worked out so that I think it really does that. We'll have discussions of race and gender and their relationship with gun violence. We'll talk about mental health and human rights, talk about public health and the historical context of gun violence in Louisiana. I'm also pleased to announce that John Ritchie, a New Orleans filmmaker and documentarian, will be showing his films, Shell Shocked, and his forthcoming film, 91%, a film about guns, in an informal setting across the way in the main alumni house, the kind of living room area. If you go over there, you'll see where the screen is set up. So there's a lot going on today. We'll have these panel discussions. We'll also have the film showings. Feel free to go and informally watch the films, to talk with John, but also feel welcome to stick around here and listen to the panelists on the program. So I thank you for coming. We'll begin our first panel of the program shortly at 9:30. Thank you. Good morning. If I could have your attention, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first panel of the program. For those of you who have just arrived, I'm Michael Martin, Director of the Center for Louisiana Studies. Thank you for coming out. We want to thank our Alumni Association, thank the College of Liberal Arts, thank AOC Community Media for helping us put this event on. As I said earlier, we're going to have a lot of different topics covered. We're going to look at gun violence in Louisiana in a number of different ways, and we're going to start today by discussing gender and gun violence. I'm going to now call up to the microphone the moderator for this particular panel, Sarah Ritchie.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much for organizing this excellent symposium. In fact, what appears to be a series of symposia on major social issues in contemporary social issues in Louisiana. So thanks so much. As you guys here probably already know, the U.S. leads all other industrialized nations in gun-related deaths. Americans are 20 times more likely to be killed with a gun than people in other industrialized nations. According to FBI statistics, there's a mass shooting in America about once every 2 weeks. But if you factor in domestic violence homicide, it's every single day. In fact, in an analysis of recent mass shootings over the last 9 years, domestic violence factored into 57% of them, of occurrences of mass shootings. Add to this, in Louisiana, we live in the most deadly state in the nation for gun violence. We have one of the, I'm fact-checking our number 2, our current number, that we're currently number 2. I'm actually thinking, according to a June 2015 study released by Everytown, that we are once again number 1. We are ranked number 1 as the most deadliest state for gun violence.
That was my finding.
Okay, back up. So our rate of gun violence is 9.7 people are killed per 100,000 people, and that's 2.5 times higher than the national average. So it's rough. We've got problems on our hands. We're here to talk about gender and gun violence. In terms of gender, women are leading the movement to prevent gun violence. Women are advocating for greater regulation. I want to point out that in our audience is Donna Dees, the founder of the Million Moms March. Will you raise your hand? A fantastic advocate for gun violence prevention. We also have here today, right outside, an organization that I'm a member of called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And so I want to call attention to the fact that women are leading the movement to prevent gun violence in our nation. And we're leading that movement against men who are more often the users of guns. So again, in terms of gender, we have a crisis of masculinity on our hands. Now I'm going to stop talking and let you guys worry about it. Let me introduce to consider how Louisiana women, men, and gender relations factor into all of the statistics we've heard so far this morning. Doctors Stern and Skilton, who are going to talk with you about disaster, misogyny, and domestic violence. Spoiler alert, we are also leading the nation in domestic violence homicides. They'll each speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to some discussion questions they've prepared. Quickly, let me introduce these exquisite scholars. Liz Skilton is currently assistant professor in history at UL. She has a PhD in history from Tulane University, which she earned in 2013. And at Tulane, she began research on her current book project, which reviews 20th century disaster and disaster capitalism history by looking at the effect of gendered hurricane naming practices in perception, commemoration, and memory. And Amy Stearns, who I'll go ahead and introduce now before ceding the floor. Amy Stearns is an assistant professor of criminal justice here at UL. She earned her PhD in criminal justice, right? In sociology. She has no web presence. I think she knows more than we do about how to keep ourselves protected. PhD earned in 2014 in sociology from the University of Oklahoma. Her scholarship focuses on women's experiences in jail, and she recently published in Feminist Formations. I do need to say one word, and that is that the subject here is very difficult and personal for many of us, and that includes me. So please be patient, as some of us may need to kind of move in and out of the room to take a breather. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today, and a special thank you to the Center for Louisiana Studies for hosting this very important event. When the original call for participants went out for a panel discussion on gender and gun violence, I responded immediately. The Lafayette Grand Theater shooting of this past summer was horrifically shocking, but sadly unsurprising in historical context. The issue of gender and gun violence is fraught with political complications, cultural sensitivities, and historical misconceptions. However, these are all the reasons why we should talk about it. The panel today is meant to be an introduction to these themes, not a presentation of research, but a directed forum for proposing ways to look at this event within context. In addition, each of the panelists will introduce some themes that they believe should be discussed in a panel on gender and gun violence. I want to preface my introduction by stating outright that I do gender and environmental history, and I focus on disaster. I teach courses on U.S. Southern history, environmental history, and women and gender history, including a current course on the history of Louisiana women. Thus, I view this event through the lens of disasters like it, and am particularly influenced by the way that it has been rationalized or explained in the context of broader Louisiana and American history. When the Lafayette shooting took place, the immediate reaction was akin to a major storm. Premonitions about who was injured or affected and attempts to outline a timeline of events was the chief priority. As reports became more detailed and information was released about its effects, a major question emerged: how could this happen here? While this question is raised every time there is a mass shooting, it was used after Columbine, Aurora, and Sandy Hook. It was particularly poignant in Louisiana and expressed widely on social media. The answers to this question appeared in three different ways. It was rationalized as being caused by Louisiana's longer history of gender-related issues, as part of larger changes in Southern and American gun culture, and as an abnormal event or disaster that will never be repeated again. In 2013, Louisiana was ranked the worst state in the nation to be a woman, for three major reasons: gender equity, access to health care, and particularly violence against women. The state was notorious for historical inequities regarding the legal status of women in the state, such as being one of the last states to approve women's right to vote, the last to repeal the head and master law, and to find women as subordinates to men, and behind on the introduction of policies in relation to marital rape and abuse, and on sexual harassment and assault, and with considerably lax policies protecting women from gun violence, causing, as Dr. Martin pointed out earlier, 17 women to be killed by guns per year in Louisiana. Putting the Lafayette shooting in this ranking only increased the state's depreciated spot in national rankings. While Lafayette may have been the happiest city in America, the state is known for its policies on women's rights and not in a positive light. In this light, gender and gun violence is particularly rampant in Louisiana, making it a ripe place for continued problems. A second rationalization for why this event would take place in Louisiana blamed the larger American gun culture that has become an easy culprit in other mass shootings. There are many questions that come to mind with gun violence history. When do the origins of the American gun culture begin, for instance? How has the culture of gun violence accelerated or worsened over time? And how specifically does this gun culture affect women and men in Louisiana? Historians have argued for years that Americans' gun ownership is a complex problem to study. What most agree on is that there are three major cultural periods of gun ownership: the early American period, the Civil War and Reconstruction period, and civil rights and beyond. Prior to the 1830s, gun ownership was almost exclusively reserved for the military, protection on the homestead, pest control, and as a luxury good. From a commodities perspective, it was much harder to produce guns and much more expensive to purchase them in this early period. However, gun ownership changed dramatically with the introduction of new automatic weaponry, gun manufacturing companies, and marketing techniques during the 1830s and 1840s. With manufacturing companies such as Smith & Wesson and Colt, guns became a part of American life, and with this, associated with concepts of masculinity. Marketing imagery depicted women, children, and honor as continually protected by armed men. With the Civil War and during the Reconstruction fallout, historians have argued that gun ownership reasserted masculinity during a conflicting political period, particularly in the South and in Louisiana with events like the Colfax Massacre. Past Reconstruction, guns were continuously used to protect vulnerable populations and regulate certain individuals' usage of them. The impetus for racial conflict with the Civil Rights Movement and Vietnam War added fuel to the fire and reinvigorated gun ownership. Through the 1980s and 1990s, with the introduction of a digital marketplace and an expanding commodity base, this has only increased the normality of these items in everyday American lives. Similarly, the access to and interest in a plethora of types of guns increased consumption. Encouraging this interest was the consumption of violent video games, television shows, music, and movies, all of which stress explicitly gendered ideas of gun usage. In this sense, the marketplace has expanded as guns have become cheaper and easier to get, while at the same time highlighted in popular culture as a means of asserting masculinity. Corresponding to these shifting trends in gun ownership and usage, it is not hard to wonder where this proposed culture of guns comes from. When we compare this history with ideas of Southern masculinity, these trends become even more enlightening. From the Colfax Massacre to today's television show Swamp People, gun usage has been a defining factor in Southern masculine identity that defends, protects, provides, and regulates society. The fact that when violence occurred this last summer, it threatened a supposedly safe Southern town and violated the perpetuated myth of protected Southern femininity plays a strong role in the reaction to the shooting. The victims were women, the aggressor a man. This goes against everything that Southern culture supposedly stands for, however fits with a larger timeline of gender and gun violence. Thus, the Lafayette shooting is part of a larger narrative of Louisiana and the South's longer history of gender and gun violence. It is no surprise that this event occurred at a pivotal moment where Southerners in particular have been struggling with the definition of what it means to be Southern in the modern era, particularly regarding larger issues of gender, race, class, and history. The final rationalization used to explain why this event occurred in Lafayette proposes that it was a disaster, an abnormal, one-time event that would never occur in a place like Lafayette again. While this might seem odd to think about initially, viewing a shooting as a disaster is an extremely helpful lens to help us examine the event's reaction within a community, state, and national level. Disasters can be defined in many different ways, particularly through the terminology we use: natural and man-made, slow or fast, and small scale and large scale. A disaster also usually has a defined beginning, middle, and end, including the hype leading up to it or the longer history of policy that has shaped its ultimate failure, the event itself, and the aftermath or rebuilding process that occurs afterward. In this sense, the Lafayette shooting was a disaster. While man-made and small scale, it has extenuating ripple effects and a past history that led to it. Community activism and remembrance events like the Lafayette Strong movement have positioned the Grand Theater shooting to become a recognized disaster and a central focus in this debate on American, Southern, and Louisiana gun violence. However, while immediate call for change through response, pledges for support, and celebrity activism built strong momentum, it has unfortunately stagnated at the 2-month mark. Where we will go from here is unknown, but the Lafayette Strong movement has the potential to inspire further discussion of the necessity of revisiting gun violence and gender as a central issue in Louisiana politics. If Lafayette and Louisiana want to encourage change, it is necessary to treat this event as other historical disasters, starting at the community level where there are many invested stakeholders and working upwards to review the policies related to mitigation and potentially prevent future events from occurring. Overall, the Lafayette shooting is part of a complicated culture of gun violence in the U.S., and Louisiana is and will continue to be at its focus due to its history and position on gender-related issues for years to come.
No, can you hear me all right? All right, I'm a little shorter than Dr. Skelton is. Thank you. Thank you so much for putting on this symposium and for allowing us to speak. I hate to follow Dr. Skelton. She's such an eloquent speaker, and I'm a little more off the cuff. So, but when Dr. Skelton and I met and discovered we would both be on this panel, it was interesting that we were both thinking about the Lafayette Theater shooting in the context of gender and gun violence, and how we wanted to make that central to our talk. At the same time, we wanted to focus on gender and gun violence in general and in the state. So I'll be talking about both those things. I feel like I'm echoing quite a bit. Okay. In class, I'm very loud, and I don't need a microphone, but larger statistics and trends. Now, you'll hear many statistics bandied about here today, and they may differ by, oh, we're first place, we're second place, we're fourth place. It kind of depends on which agency you were getting your figures from and which years were studied. So many of the statistics that I have to introduce my subject come from the Violence Policy Center, which puts Louisiana at #1 in gun homicide rate. In addition, it puts Louisiana at #4 for women who are murdered by men. The latest figures show that the states that lead are Alaska, South Carolina, Oklahoma, where I'm from, and Louisiana. These are sobering facts. The good news is that over the past 18 years, the rate of women who have been killed by men in the U.S. has dropped 31%. The bad news, Louisiana's rate has not dropped, along with other states, in the past 18 years. In fact, Louisiana's rate is 83% higher than the national average of women killed by men, and once again has not dropped, while other states have dropped. This is very alarming. I'd like to talk some theory briefly about why it is that it tends to be men behind a gun and not women. It's a fact that is so obvious that it is often overlooked. There are a few theories that I'd like to go over. theories of gender that attempt to explain why men tend to be more violent than women. Not that men as a whole are more violent, but then when a violent act occurs, it does tend to be male. So one theory is from the world of sociobiology, which attempts to combine society with biological framework. It states, it was popularized by theorist E.O. Wilson, says that males and females act in ways that maximize reproduction. So men, with an evolutionary instinct to be more aggressive in order to maximize reproduction, that would explain why they tend to be more aggressive and more violent, and women do not. Many theorists do not care for sociobiology, myself included. It tends to be a bit deterministic. Again, it tends to put men on a certain trajectory. You will be violent. You are evolutionarily wired to be violent, which is not the case. Another theory is a socialization theory that says children, males and female children, learn how to be violent or not violent depending on what kind of role models they have. So for example, you might see a young girl who has many brothers be more aggressive than a young girl with no brothers, simply because she has learned to act one way or another. We tend to tell children things that socialize them to behave like young ladies or like young men. If you've ever told your son or heard a small boy being told, boys don't cry, you're okay, shake it off. Whereas girls, we do allow to express some of that pain. So socialization is another theory that suggests men behave aggressively because they learn to be aggressive as part of growing up in our culture. Another theory, I'll call this the social construction of gender, that we have certain ideals that men and women are supposed to adhere to. Our men are supposed to be like James Bond, the ultimate male. They're supposed to be wealthy, good-looking, fit, have lots of women, have brains, material possessions, a wonderful job. Right? The ideal woman, of course, we have ideals we must adhere to as well, being feminine, not being violent, being emotional, being beautiful, being thin. However, when women do not attain this ideal, they don't tend to react with violence, unless the violence is turned on themselves. Anorexia, bulimia, cutting. Oftentimes, young women do turn violent on themselves when they can't attain the ideal. When men cannot attain the ideal construction of manhood, they do often reach for something that will assert their masculinity. I'll repeat what Dr. Skilton said, that gun violence and guns can be a means of asserting masculinity when you are not attaining all the other ideals. So I want to move on and talk about the theater shooting and talk about active shooter situations across the U.S. Yes?
What is the difference in the ratio between male and female homicides and domestic violence?
What is the ratio?
You said it's a difference. How male more often, what is it? 3 to 1, 5 to 1?
I'm not sure of the ratio. It's overwhelmingly male that perpetrates violence upon females. So that's something that I didn't look up. I didn't look up the exact figure. Does anybody know right now? And it would vary depending on the year, depending on the agency.
I think the FBI says it's 1 in 3 domestic violence homicides committed by women.
Committed by women? Yeah, somebody can Google it. That's the beauty of it. Definitely, whatever the ratio is, men are normally the perpetrators. Of course, that's not saying that women do not. Right. Not saying that women do not perform these acts, they are just in the minority. So I wanted to talk about what an active shooter event is. The FBI defines it as one individual who is engaging in or attempting to engage in killing people in a enclosed area. The statistics that the FBI compiled showed that 94% of active shooters over the past 15 years have been male. Some agencies put it higher, put it at 97%. So what are the reasons for this? What are the reasons that the person that came into the Lafayette Theater was a male? What did it have to do with being a male? The few facts that I found were that this gunman was accused of domestic violence by his wife in 2005, that in 2008, his wife removed all weapons from their home because she was worried and concerned. In 2015, his wife filed for divorce. This person, from the data that was gathered on him, clearly had a view of women that was less than complimentary, did not believe that women should be working outside the home. These sort of what we consider kind of an old-fashioned view of women. Of course, and as we'll hear in the next panel, mental illness does have a lot to do with gun violence. But again, women have mental illnesses as well, and still they do not turn to gun violence. So here we have a person who clearly is having trouble with women, has a dismal view of women, ends up in an Amy Schumer movie, which is about a sexually active young woman, which was something that he did not approve of, and opens fire. It may be an accident that the victims were female, Jillian Johnson and Macy Breaux, right? But it was not an accident that the perpetrator was male. So this leaves us with many questions. If perpetrators of violence are typically male, what can we do about it? What type of programming, what type of societal norms should change so that men do not feel like they need to assert themselves through violence? And you will see a lot of blame placed upon video games and music. When the Columbine shooting occurred, the game Doom was implicated. Another active shooting event, I think Marilyn Manson, the singer, was implicated. And certainly the violence that is in our culture and is embedded in our culture, like Dr. Skilton explained in American Culture, I don't think it encourages us to become violent, but it certainly supports a violent masculinity, especially when all other avenues have closed to you. So someone with a mental illness who has no job, whose wife has left him, who believes that the country is turning too liberal towards women's rights, is it a huge surprise that this is the type of person who came into our city and randomly walked into a theater? And again, I will ask you, because I grapple with this, I don't know what to do. What do we teach our children? How do we heal as a community? How do we prevent these types of active shooting events from happening in the country, or can we at all? I will leave you with those questions. I hope you have some answers. Thank you for your attention.
Do you guys want to ask some of the specific questions? I don't know if that was much time.
Sure, I'll ask one. Yeah. Okay, I would like to ask, Do you think that we should change laws about gun ownership? That's usually the first thing that comes up. As soon as an event happens, the talking heads start, gun control, gun control. Certainly, this has a lot to do with why this person and why many of them gain access to guns. But is that the answer? What do you all think?
Yes.
I'll be brief. For years, I would have immediately said yes. But unfortunately, the situation is such that people are, if someone wants a gun, they're going to be able to get a gun, whether it's legally or illegally. And that's where the real crutch, that's the killer, right? It's a bad pun, sorry, didn't mean it that way. But certainly, there are going to be situations where if there were better screening for the legal purchase of guns, if there were more regulation on that part of it, I firmly believe that some incidents would be prevented. It's not going to take care of everything. Nothing's going to take care of all of the violence, we know that. But we can't just sit here and say, oh, well, they're going to get a gun anyway. Well, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, it just makes good sense, to do
Actually,
mental
research
health.
has shown that in the 14 states that have increased background checks on gun purchases, so increasing background checks from, currently the federal law stipulates that background checks must be performed on any gun purchase at a federally licensed gun dealer. That leaves room for an additional 40% of all owned guns to be purchased through online facilitated purchases or at gun shows. In the 14 states that have increased their background checks to cover all gun purchases, the rates of gun homicide are decreased by 48%. So I would have to respectfully disagree. I think increasing our laws does help.
And just to add to that, about your caveat about if somebody wants to get a gun, they're going to find a way, assumes that gun violence is perhaps not rational, but certainly a premeditated thing, that a decision is going to be made in advance to acquire a weapon and then commit an act like that. But I think most statistics would probably bear out that it's very often a crime of passion that happens in an instant. And the big question may simply be, is a gun sitting there for the person to use? I don't know if this is true anymore, but after Columbine, I remember seeing a historical analysis that claimed at the time that incidents of sort of similar hairy-carry, sudden mass violence had actually, contrary to popular belief, had actually not increased in recent times. That there was a more or less stable pattern of this happening in the United States back to colonial times. But the big difference is, in general, people did not have a mechanism at hand capable of killing lots of people when they did go crazy. They would sort of stab a few people before they could be brought under control, and that would be the end of it. So I think there's a lot of hesitation. I have a lot of hesitation for those reasons about saying that merely because somebody could get a gun if they wanted to, that there shouldn't be limitations on it.
It also strikes me that the example of this person who clearly needed some kind of intervention, I'm guessing had many things going on in his life, and several of them probably in a civilized, I would say, setting, should have had social networks, really much more than simply not access to a gun. Because although a gun is a very, very, very good tool to create mayhem, there are less useful tools to create mayhem. So if he could have done something not as effective, but awful, he could have gotten a gun, he would still have been a dangerous individual. So focusing on, well, that is very good, because guns are very dangerous, but so are automobiles and toxins and everything else. So really the question is, why is there always money for a football program in every high school, but not the music program, and not the art program? These are endemic problems. They go right down to the carpet. So why did this guy hate women? Which is to say,
That's an excellent
hate
question.
people. That was his problem. Why did he want to extinguish life? Then it's not the gun's fault, or the knife, or the club, or the baseball bat. So in a certain sense, the question has to be posed, why are we generating people that don't like people? Once we get rid of all the guns, that's going to be a tool that people can use to create mayhem. It's good to get rid of the guns because they are really, really good, to extinguish life. But, let's see about getting rid of or dealing with these people.
Yeah. Follow up on what this gentleman said, picking up on the money. We're looking at this at a micro level instead of a macro level. We're looking at the individual instead of the whole problem. We have a gun culture. How does that gun culture evolve? Well, the problem, as I see it, is money. We don't have a seat at the table in our Congress because the NRA and all the gun manufacturers have their influence, shall we say. And we sit around talking about individual incidents, but we don't have any input on a national level. And until such time as that changes, the conversation will remain the same. I retired from the New Orleans Police Department. I'm very familiar with gun violence in Louisiana and New Orleans. I would love to see all the guns go away. That train left the station a long time ago. The way to frame this or look at this is, okay, the problem's here. We can't make it go away. How can we make a bad situation better? Incrementally. I'm not saying just give up altogether. If they'd done that in New York, Times Square, it would still be prostitution and all the pornography houses around it. It's changed. Change can happen, but not at the micro level.
I think one of the interesting things is, and maybe we're just moving the focus over, but for this panel, it's about gender and gun violence. And bringing up your point about Congress, an interesting thing to look at Congress is, what's the representation of women in Congress? And would the NRA have such a stronghold if women were fully represented in Congress? And I think that those are interesting questions and things for us to work toward as Dr. Ritchie, not Sarah, my friend, Dr. Ritchie pointed out, what was the number? It was an outrageous number of women that are killed in, I forgot the statistics of male on female violence as opposed to, that men are using guns. Yeah, men are using guns in domestic violence and all these other situations, and that women are leading the movement to essentially save themselves. And that if we do look on the macro level at ways that we can make a change, that perhaps putting more women in these leadership and in these, putting them in a way that they can protect themselves, we might see that reflect on the micro level.
Missy for Senate.
What?
There was a question? I just wonder, and this is, I know this is about gender, but how do we make any changes when facts are overlooked or sometimes even denied? I mean, the facts are there. If you look at the states with the higher gun control, I'm not saying take guns away, but gun control violence. Under countries that have more control have the least violence. And it seems like that doesn't click with people. And if you can't even show them facts and say, look, this is working. Because anytime I have that conversation, there's always a but and then an anecdote or something that, you know, but it's this then that. Just, if you can't even say, just look at the results. Forget about all the details from it. Look at the results. This is where we should go. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional about it.
Yeah. Well, I think many times, even when facts are presented, you do see those through a certain lens, so someone could easily say, this is a dangerous state, and I need a gun to protect myself and my family.
So you're saying they just kind of like turn it around?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, the evidence supports that guns in the home are by a factor of somebody, Donna maybe can give me the exact factor, because I'm going to go with 55%, which is, I don't know where I got that one from. It's just, but by a very large factor, having a gun in the home increases rates of suicide, accidental death, or gun violence. So I think you're right. I mean, the facts, having the evidence at hand is helpful. I think it's disarming. And there is no evidence on the other side. Mm-hmm. So ask them, you know, I think having that, I'm glad to hear that you're having that conversation, because just continuing to persevere and listen and demonstrate the evidence is the only way we're going to sort of accomplish anything.
And as far as, I can appreciate and I understand the whole idea that guns don't kill people, people kill people, that sort of thing. That's really frustrating to me. I think the exact same thing was said in the automobile industry. If cars don't kill people, people kill people. And they were fighting against all these things that we have now that make cars so much safer. And it really did make a difference. And so I just don't understand why people don't want to do everything they can. You know, so you have to wait 3 days to get your gun or whatever it is. You know, I don't understand why. Very simple. You know, we put a lock on a briefcase to protect our papers. Why can't we have that attitude with guns? Don't take them away, just make them safer for people. You know?
I think that's a great way to look at it. And again, it comes down to this question of micro versus macro study, right? If we see Lafayette as just one event, it only affects this community, right? And it peters out in terms of support after a certain point of time. If we see it in this longer chain of multiple events, like for instance, the statistics since Sandy Hook, there have been 176 school shootings. That is a number you cannot deny, right? But you need all of those events to be able to build this strong argument to go up against a major industry or to enforce change on a smaller level, right? So.
It feels very defeating when 20 kindergartners can be slaughtered, and I feel like nothing has changed.
I will say, if you look at the state-by-state level, I agree with you, it's staggering that we haven't made any movement at the federal level, but since Sandy Hook, at the state-by-state level, progress is being made. More states are adopting greater gun control. You can lead this at the state level, and I hope we can do something like that in Louisiana. Rich?
I think part of that issue is, on a national level, is that in many respects it's not really about the guns themselves. And this is some gun control, focusing on the guns, because there's all kinds of statistics about that gathering at the library, about the overwhelming number of gun owners who support reasonable gun control measures whenever they're presented to them. Even overwhelming numbers of NRA members support these kinds of things. And of course, yet that never translates into political change, right? Because obviously those people who support gun control measures when they're asked don't vote for people who support them, right? They vote for Republicans. Right? They vote for politicians who they know don't support those measures, but those politicians support all kinds of other cultural issues that are wrapped up in guns. It's not, the gun is symbolic, really, in many respects. It's part of the package of the politics that goes with, policies against women, racial politics, anti-gay politics, these kinds of things. And so, the gun issue, when you mention guns on a rational level and you give them statistics, yes, they're going to say it's, sure. But when it comes to politics, the gun is really wrapped up in, well, you're going to take my guns, it's all about these other things. And that's a really fundamental problem that I don't know you're going to be able to deal with rationally in that sense. This obviously say one thing, but it doesn't translate into politics.
Well, we have to make it part of the political conversation, in a way that it's just not. I went to the stump speeches. Did anybody go? They were great on Saturday at the Horse Farm, and it's not part of anybody's political platform around here, at least.
Yeah, they can't afford to.
Yeah, right. We do need to start, I think that Michael Martin is gesturing at me. Sure. So he's going to have to come in here and quiet this down, because we're having a good conversation. Does anybody else want to say anything?
Well, I just wanted to say that I believe that from a social and psychological standpoint, you still also need to go back to the fact that it's more male, less female. So I still think it starts with the family. It starts with, if two children at the age of 3 years old, a boy and a girl, both fall and scrape their knee, and the little boy is hearing "don't cry," and the little girl is being told it's okay. I think at a very simple level, we are training people in a John Wayne society
Yeah.
to become adults. That after keeping, it's like the tea kettle. The steam it's going to go somewhere, and so I think that has to be part of that discussion.
Yeah.
I agree.
Thank you. 10 minutes? Oh, we got plenty of time. Tom had his hand up for a while. Let me. Tom, are you Tom too? Because there's a Tom back. Tom Schoonover.
Yeah, I would just. Thank you, sir. I would just make a short comment that I think relates to a lot of the questions, and that is, we're not making a distinction between rifles and handguns. And that is, the NRA makes that distinction, and so do a lot of other people. There are a lot of hunters who don't want restriction on guns because they have 5 rifles at home.
Yes.
And I think that is an important question, because that's also, most of the homicides in a house are done with a handgun.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, now.
I was just wondering what's going on with Alaska and Wyoming? Why are they
So high?
Top states? Low density.
Alaska is also #1 in suicide, so I'm not sure what's going on.
They have very weak gun laws.
State.
It's connected to masculinity and
The frontier mentality.
yeah, but it's also there's factors that are connected to American Indians and frontier, very small communities. There's a lot of drug use and alcoholism. There's a number of factors.
There's also a lot of guns there.
Yeah, and there are very weak gun laws there, and there's a correlation between weak gun laws and high gun deaths.
And dark, yeah.
There are other factors that they absolutely do.
That kind of builds into this comment. It goes back to something that someone said earlier. We need more women in positions of power to, speak the message. We need less guns. The only problem is, in a lot of states like Alaska and like Louisiana, there are a lot of women just as involved in gun culture.
Mm-hmm.
They love their guns. They love to go hunting, and they don't see any issue with owning a gun or, how that could lead to violence or anything. So that's an issue too, that not all women are operating on the same page.
Oh, absolutely.
We haven't talked a lot about class, socioeconomics within this discussion. How does that factor into?
Do we have a panel on that?
Well, largely, right? Money,
gives you the ability to buy guns, right? In addition, it also opens up a trade market for illegal gun purchases and exclusive guns, such as those large machine guns. And that does play a role in this historically, right? So guns were almost exclusively for protection. You had very few, and there's less regulation in the earliest period, and then we get to this period, the market is opened up. We have these large manufacturers and a plethora of different types of guns. So the question becomes, in terms of legislatively, how do you regulate all of these different types of guns? And distinction is one of those ways to say that some guns are bad, other ones are okay. And this issue of who gets the guns becomes a question that relates back to class. So all of this coming into head here, so needs to be part of the discussion.
But that touches on essentially what you were mentioning. For 30 years, studies have shown that putting a firearm in a household makes a household more dangerous, not safe. So that's a done deal. Burglars are not going to climb in the windows and make a house unsafe. The house becomes unsafe because the weapon is there, and people get a flare-up like a domestic violence episode, and what would be just a shouting episode turns into a shooting episode because it's armed. But it's the media or entertainment or novels that establish an air of kind of paranoia. The sense that things are unsafe, even though statistics show that the United States has become more and more and more safe since the American Revolution, that it's less violent, and now it's less violent over the last couple of decades. So why do people perceive that there's more danger? They go out and buy a weapon because they have to defend their home. And what are they defending it from? Well, they're defending it from an image they see on TV, you know, about this dangerous other. It doesn't, the problem, again, your question is not the gun that does it, but if the gun is there, it gets done. So of the questions, it seems to me the question is often posed in a kind of funny way. Well, why do people think that they're in danger?
I think women think that they're in danger, and that's a reason that a lot of women buy a handgun. Men, I think, are still wrapped up in this idea that they are supposed to have one. In Louisiana, also tying into the class argument and everything, there's a huge, this is a hunting and, what is it, sportsman's paradise, right? Sorry, I'm not from here. Sportsman's paradise. And so the ability to hunt is very important to some people. They don't want that regulated. I can provide for myself and my family. So it's not always just fear. With women, it is. And I know some that carry in their car because they are afraid. But men, typically, it's more I'm using it for hunting, or I'm using it to protect my household from, or to be what I'm supposed to be here in the South. I'm supposed to be a landowner with a gun. I'm not sure that, I know the media definitely plays a part in everything is so scary when really it's much safer, but I think it's a gendered purchase as well.
9-to-1 domestic violence. But if it's a ratio of 2-1, if many men are being victims of homicide and domestic violence, then men should have a feeling, I don't know when I'll go over, and my wife or girlfriend will shoot me.
I don't think that's a big fear.
Well, it's not. It's not. But if the question being why is it? You know, which is a curious thing.
Jill has an answer for you.
Just to let you know, women don't tend to kill men with guns. Women tend to use other mechanisms to kill.
They poison.
Serious. Yeah. Women poison.
Women use food preparation because that's part of their duty. So you'll find that.
So when you're looking at two different ratios, as you the term you used. Men do tend to kill women with guns. Women tend to kill men with other means.
I here come back to the, I need a gun to protect my household. Protect it from whom or why? Another neighbor who also needs a gun to protect his household from you. Or is it only defective people, we need to look at broken people. If so, how do we identify defective or broken people? And is that even within the bounds of our Constitution to do so? And to me, it seems like we always have these defective people in our society, but to give them free access to a gun, it's like giving an angry 2-year-old a can of gasoline and matches. We wouldn't do that.
By show of hands, how many people in here own guns or have guns in their home?
Maybe about half of the room then?
How many people grew up with guns in the home? That's the other factor.
So it's part of the generational thing too, I think. As a child growing up a long time ago, yeah, we had guns in the home, but Oklahoma can relate to this. I grew up in a little town in the Texas Panhandle, very isolated, and gun ownership seemed to be a fairly normal thing. But now, today, we're becoming so much more urbanized. Is it really practical? From my standpoint, it's not practical to be a hunter. Number one, I don't have a place where I could go hunt. I could acquire a place if I spent a lot of money on it. And if I spend a lot of money on it and go there and hang out with the guys, well, great. It's more like a good social club, but it's not really hunting in the old sense.
This may be bringing in a whole other topic that's too involved to discuss, but do you think also that people don't have much confidence in police to be able to protect them? I mean, I said quick activity is like, this is going to happen so quickly, I need to have this now, which is not really realistic anyway.
Look, I mean,
and what is the, so I'm a business owner downtown and I had a little bit of an issue. And whenever I spoke to someone in the police department, they advised me to get a gun. And I have a ballet school full of children downtown. And he said, well, ma'am, if you're not going to help yourself, how can I help you? Honest to God, and I can tell you something.
That wasn't a responsible answer.
Yeah, and he said, I'm encouraging all business owners to get guns downtown. So be careful going into a business downtown.
We need to move on. I hope that we can continue this conversation. Thank you for expressing your feelings, for sharing. This has been a great start. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone for coming out to the first panel. I thank our panelists as well. I thought it was very, very informative, and although I was scurrying around doing other things, I was very glad to see this nice turnout. I want to remind everyone that John Ritchie is going to be showing his film. It was scheduled to start at 10, but we decided to hold off until about 10:30. Shell Shocked. If you haven't seen this film, it is absolutely remarkable. Depiction of gun violence among youth in New Orleans. Later this afternoon, he'll be showing his brand new film, which is still in the editing phase, but he's done the rough edits and agreed to share it with us, called 91%. He'll also be showing those during the noontime hour. So you're welcome to go check out the film. It's set up in the main house over here. You'll see the darkened room, although all the rooms are getting dark because of the thunder clouds that are growing up. The next panel in here will start at 10:45. So please come back and join us for that panel, which will be on human rights, gun violence, and mental health.